one of the fascinating things that you do in here is that you annotate everything. You've credited each of the songs that you use. All of these quotes can be traceable, presumably, back to the material that you found them in. Can you talk about the decision to do that and how you kind of structured this film in that way?
Well, yeah, it's called soundtrack for a reason, soundtrack to coup d'etat. But again, researching that period, I sort of figured that actually, the music was so much a political agent, so much a historical agent. Patrice Lumumba is released from prison, is sent to the Round Table. He arrives at the Round Table, but he's accompanied by Joseph Kabasele and Dr. Nico and African Jazz. He arrives 25th of January 1960 in Brussels. 27th of January, independence is claimed. And on the spot, that evening, African Jazz is composing Independence Cha-Cha. And so it's composed at Plaza Hotel in Brussels. And so the music is always very close. When Patrice Lumumba is actually, for his election campaign, he's driving in the Cadillac, the white Cadillac of Joseph Kabasele, the musician. And so it's always very close. But the story even of the Black Jazz Ambassadors, I knew that that Louis Armstrong was in the Congo in October and in November of that year, but I didn't know it was like such a correlation between the plotting of the CIA, the U.S. State Department sending out, the United States Information Agency sending out Louis Armstrong, but underneath plotting, and literally plotting an assassination while sending out Louis Armstrong. It was also for the uranium, because if we then looked further, there's a book recently published by Susan Williams, White Malice, where she was able to find documents that actually also the uranium was part of a Trojan horse, where Louis Armstrong was used as a Trojan horse to actually get a hold of that uranium, which is half. It's half of what we used for the Manhattan Project. I didn't know that either. Most of that came out of the Congo. And when Jean-Colly Bofani, Jean Bofani, the Belgian-Congo novelist that we asked to be in dialogue with for the film, then he says, every conflict mineral during all the wars in the 20th century, but even up to today, the war in space, it all comes from the Congo. Congo is delivering, but then hardly anybody in the Congo is benefiting. It's a kleptocracy. It's still the people that are sort of a marionette government that is still in power that actually gain all the money. But we were talking about the music. I also we found the Abbey Lincoln and Max Roach album, We Insist Freedom Now, was in its entirety broadcast on Belgian television. That was also fine. All the images, also John Coltrane, my favorite things, it all comes from the Belgian television. And so this is 1964, and you have Abbey Lincoln together with the Women's Rights Coalition in Harlem, Maya Angelou and Rosa Guy, initiating that protest at the Security Council when they announced the murder of Patrice Lumumba. It's musicians that actually initiate that protest. Amiri Baraka is there as well. He didn't make it inside the Security Council, but Paul Robeson is also, and Max Roach, they're in the audience. They're standing up and screaming, and it's musicians who initiate that protest. So that again, I felt we had to make or tell the story through music as a protagonist, and hence also all the soundtracks. But and then to take it one step further, you make music into the protagonist, and you try to tell a story by way of the music. When music is actually stepping onto the political stage, I thought it was sort of interesting to maybe treat the politicians as lead singers to the jazz compositions and the editing. And so you have the UN vote that actually is sort of, it's basically the lyrics to a Dizzy composition. Or you have Thelonious Monk at a round table, and the way all these white colonial faces are looking at this black musician, and it's all these parties that are all unanimously claiming independence and unanimously claiming that Patrice Lumumba should be released. And so, which was not the case afterwards. Then it was divide and conquer again. But to have that composition of Thelonious Monk, and then later on we step, of course, to the rumba, because the rumba musicians arrived later during the round table. But to set that on the composition, again, it's the politicians that become part of that jazz composition. They treat it as lyrics. And so the whole film was sort of edited in the way, there's one critique who said, this film is not about jazz, it is jazz. And maybe it was accurate. But it's not only jazz, there's also rumba. should not forget. Rumba, which again, it's the transatlantic passage. It's like the transatlantic passage of a lot of Congolese people who made it to Cuba, and then there composed the conga, and then became the cha-cha and the cha-cha in Cuba, and then through the passage of, there was trade on the ships, but there were musicians that actually were working on those ships that were sailing between the Congo and Cuba, brought the cha-cha and the rumba to the Congo. So again, there's this inspiration of the independence movement that inspires also musicians during the civil rights movement. And it's not by coincidence that Malcolm X's daughter is called Lumumba. So there's this back and forth. There was that sense of solidarity and unity that I think was so crucial, and for me also surprised that was smashed and actually sort of killed. I still think there's a resilience when Abbie Lincoln is screaming. It's still sort of saying we're angry, we don't agree with the situation, but still my country was so culpable in sort of like taking that as the ground zero of how the West would deal with the resources in the Congo.
And have you played this film in Belgium? I know there's recent pressure for countries to kind of acknowledge their colonial pasts in a way. Has there been any kind of reckoning about this particular incident in history in Belgium?
Well, it's been part of a lot of festivals, then it got released, and it's soon, the Belgian television was partner, so it's going to be on the Belgian television. I know I'm going to get grilled. I know I'm going to get grilled. But we also played in the Matonge. You have a huge Afro-P community, Afro-European community in Brussels. And it premiered at Vendôme Cinema, which is in the Matonge. That's the Congolese neighborhood in Brussels. We chose specifically to premiere there in Brussels. And it was very lively. And it was very positive reaction. And Marie-Dawn Zatmama, who is reading André Blouin's voice, came to talk, and in Jean Bouffani, the Congolese community was there. And soon they're going to take it also to Kinshasa, but they don't have money yet. They don't know yet when the Kinshasa Film Festival is going to happen. And to the André Blouin house, there was Kambale Moussavouli. We just screened it in Haarlem last 4 days ago, just a block away from the Teresa Hotel. And there was a dialogue with Kambale Moussavouli, who runs the André Blouin house. So he wants to take it also. We want to donate the film, of course, also to the André Blouin house. So there's a back and forth. But I know I might get grilled back in Belgium by the monarchy and the elite, because we still have, the invasion and the paratroopers jumping Kisangani, that's the time Stanleyville, is still being celebrated as a liberation. It's still being celebrated. It's still like, it's still something that is not like sort of talked about in Belgium. It's like the othering, and I think the othering in the United States happened within the United States. I think the othering in Belgium happened out there, so we didn't have to deal with it. It was the empire of silence, l'empire du silence. While here, because the othering happened within, there is an articulation. I don't want to romanticize it, but the othering is still sort of very far away in Belgium. And I think that's something that should be opened up as a dialogue. And of course, I'm a white guy, right? So, but I think it's so crucial that both parties sit around the table. Yeah. What were the criteria to choose certain sort of music or certain images, certain compositions for the film? It depends. For example, finding We Insist Freedom Now on Belgian television was for me quite crucial, but that was 1964. And you have all these Belgian jazz buffs in awe with a concert on television, and at the same time you have in the Congo a genocide happening. So even while this album, We Insist Freedom Now, is such, and it was inspired on like the Tears for Johannesburg track was inspired on Sharpeville Massacre, where South African women were tearing apart their passport. And that was the inspiration for the album, which is very much an activist album. But then again, it's broadcast on Belgian television. And then what's not talked about is the genocide. Even it's also contradictory. And for me, making a choice was actually to make those lines visible, even if they're contradictory, even if it's not so overt. But for example, we found that there was the woman Rosa Guy. It's actually Rosa Guy who's screaming at the United Nations Security Council. And then we could not but actually add the scream of Abbie Lincoln and make that a combination, knowing that Abbie Lincoln was present during the Security Council protest. And so that was an easy choice. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just going against. Sometimes you choose music to go against something, or, you know, Eric Dolphy and Art Blakey during the independence ceremony. For me, it was like making a comment on like sustaining Patrice Lumumba's sort of speech in a way where that was so patronizing. You know, he was a democratically elected premier, and he was not invited to speak. And then the Belgian asked him to apologize for that speech, while King Leopold was talking about Leopold II and perpetrating the whole like sort of sinister history during that speech. And I think the king should have apologized and not Patrice Lumumba. But we actually made that the music could make that comment without sort of telling too much. Although I thought Max Roach's quote about saying that Art Blakey was able to sustain independence with his 4 limbs was quite accurate, and so there's all these links that sort of made. But it was the music that could have sort of give comments. I call it jazz interrupters or something. It's again that syncopation where something is not like adequately sort of connecting to what's going on, but it's sort of interrupting something to make a comment. The rumbas was obvious, I thought, the Independence Cha-Cha. But then again, we have the Independence Cha-Cha together with Saint Nicolas. Saint Nicolas, who's like, he looks like Leopold II, basically. But it's that patronizing attitude of the colonizers that then is questioned by the rumba. And sometimes it's a bit far off. Like Alabama was, because Malcolm X is talking about the bombing in Quilo province and then taking John Coltrane. But that's something we found literally on Belgian television. There was the John Coltrane track on, actually, when they interviewed the Simba rebel, they actually had added John Coltrane's Alabama. But Alabama is inspired by Martin Luther King's speech at the church in tribute for the girls that were bombed in Birmingham. And so it's sort of one-on-one, but still it's not mentioned, but I thought it was sort of accurate when Belgian television added that.